A Ballad of John Silver by John Masefield. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Chris Pyle. A Ballad of John Silver. We were schooner-rigged and rakish, with a long and lissom hull, and we flew the pretty colors of the crossbones and the skull. We'd a big black Jolly Roger flapping grimly at the fore, and we sailed the Spanish water in the happy days of yore. We'd a long brass gun amidships, like a well-conducted ship. We had a brace of pistols and a cutlass at the hip. It's a point which tells against us, and a fact to be deplored, but we chased the goodly merchantmen and laid their ships aboard. Then the dead men fouled the scuppers, and the wounded filled the chains, and the paintwork all was splatter-dashed with other people's brains. She was boarded, she was looted, she was scuttled till she sank, and the pale survivors left us by the medium of the plank. Oh, then it was, while standing by the taffrail on the poop, we could hear the drowning folk lament the absent chicken coop. Then, having washed the blood away, we'd little else to do than to dance a quiet hornpipe, as the old salts taught us to do. Oh, the fiddle on the forecastle, and the slapping naked soles, and the genial down the middle jake, and curtsy when she rolls, with the silver seas around us, and the pale moon overhead, and the lookout not a-looking, and his pipe-bowl glowing red. Ah, the pig-tailed quitting pirates, and the pretty pranks we played! All have since been put a stop to by the naughty Board of Trade. The schooners and the merry crews are laid away to rest, a little south of sunset in the islands of the blest. End of A Ballad of John Silver by John Masefield. Recording by Chris Pyle. An Old Song Resung by John Masefield. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Chris Pyle. An Old Song Resung. I saw a ship a-sailing, 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 with emeralds and rubies and sapphires in her hold, and a boatswain in a blue coat bawling at the railing, piping through a silver call that had a chain of gold. The summer wind was failing, and the tall ship rolled. I saw a ship a-steering, 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 with roses and red thread worked upon her sails, with sacks of purple amethyst, the spoils of buccaneering, skins of musky yellow wine, and silks and veils. Her merry men were cheering, hauling on the brails. I saw a ship a-sinking, 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 with glittering sea-water splashing on her decks, with seamen in her spirit-room, singing songs and drinking, pulling claret bottles down and knocking off the necks. The broken glass was chinking as she sank among the wrecks. End of An Old Song Resung by John Masefield. Recording by Chris Pyle.
The Adventures, Trial, and Execution of Captain Gow by Charles Ellms. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Adventures, Trial, and Execution of Captain Gow. Captain Gow sailed from Amsterdam in July 1724 on board the George galley for Santa Cruz, where they took in beeswax. Scarcely had they sailed from that place when Gow and several others, who had formed a conspiracy, seized the vessel. One of the conspirators cried, "There is a man overboard." The captain instantly ran to the side of the vessel, when he was seized by two men, who attempted to throw him over. He, however, so struggled that he escaped from their hands. One, Winter, with a knife, attempted to cut him at the throat, but missing his aim, the captain was yet saved. But Gow, coming aft, shot him through the body, and throwing him over the rail, he caught hold of the main sheet. But Gow, taking up an axe, with 2 blows, so disabled him that he fell into the sea and was drowned. The conspirators proceeded to murder all who were not in their horrid plot, which being done, James Williams came upon deck, and striking one of the guns with his cutlass, saluted Gow in the following words: "Captain Gow, you are welcome to your command." Williams was declared lieutenant, and the other officers being appointed, the captain addressed them, saying, "If hereafter I see any of you whispering together, or if any of you refuse to obey my orders, let every such man depend upon it that he shall certainly go the same way as those that are just gone before." Their first prize was the Sarah Snow of Bristol. After they had rifled the vessel and received one man from it, they allowed her to prosecute her voyage. The Delight of Poole was the next vessel that fell into their hands, but they not long after captured two others, from which they received a quantity of fish, and from the other bread, beef, and pork. They also forced two men from the latter ship. A French ship, not long after, furnished them with wine, oil, figs, oranges, and lemons, to the value of £500. In a short time after they captured their last prize, and, as she made no resistance, they plundered and dismissed her. They next sailed for the Orkney Isles to clean, but were apprehended by a gentleman of that country, brought up to London, and tried before a court of admiralty in May 1725. When the first indictment was read, Gow obstinately refused to plead, for which the court ordered his thumbs to be tied together with whipcord. The punishment was several times repeated by the executioner and another officer, they drawing the cord every time till it broke. But he still being stubborn, refusing to submit to the court, the sentence was pronounced against him, which the law appoints in such cases, that is, that he should be taken back to prison and there pressed to death. The gaoler was then ordered to conduct him back and see that the sentence was executed the next morning. Meanwhile, the trials of the prisoners, his companions, went forward. But the next morning, when the press was prepared, pursuant to the order of the court the day before, he was so terrified with the apprehension of dying in that manner, that he sent his humble petition to the court, praying that he might be admitted to plead. This request being granted, he was brought again to the bar, and arraigned upon the first indictment, to which he pleaded not guilty. Then the depositions that had been given against the other prisoners were repeated, upon which he was convicted, and received the sentence of death accordingly, which he suffered in company with Captain Weaver and William Ingham. The stories of these two men are so interwoven with others that it will be impossible to distinguish many of their particular actions. They were, however, proved to have been concerned, if not the principal actors, in the following piracies. First, the seizing a Dutch ship in August 1722, and taking from thence 100 pieces of Holland, value £800, 1,000 pieces of 8, value £250. Secondly, the entering and pillaging the Dolphin of London, William Haddock, out of which they got 300 pieces of 8, value £75, 40 gallons of rum, and other things, on the 20th of November in the same year. Thirdly, the stealing out of a ship called the Don Carlos, Lot Neakins, master, 400 ounces of silver, value £100, 50 gallons of rum, value 30 shillings, 1,000 pieces of 8, 100 pistoles, and other valuable goods. And fourthly, the taking from a ship called the England, 10 pipes of wine, value £250, the two last charges both in the year 1721. Weaver returned home, and came to Mr. Thomas Smith at Bristol in a very ragged condition, and pretending that he had been robbed by pirates, Smith, who had been acquainted with him 8 or 9 years before, provided him with necessaries, and he walked about unmolested for some time. But Captain Joseph Smith, who knew him when a pirate, one day met him, and asked him to go and take a bottle with him. When they were both in the tavern, he told him that he had been a considerable sufferer by his boarding his vessel. Therefore, said he, as I understand that you are in good circumstances, I expect that you will make me some restitution, which, if you do, I will never hurt a hair of your head, because you were very civil to me when I was in your hands. But, as this recompense was never given, Weaver was apprehended and executed. End of The Adventures, Trial and Execution of Captain Gow, by Charles Ellms.
Adventure with Pirates by James O. Brayman. Coffee Break Collection 18. Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Adventure with Pirates. There lived, not many years ago, on the eastern shore of Mount Desert, a large island off the coast of Maine, an old fisherman by the name of Jedediah Spinnet, who owned a schooner of some 100 tons burden in which he, together with some 4 stout sons, was wont to go, about once a year, to the Grand Banks for the purpose of catching codfish. The old man had 5 things, upon the peculiar merits of which he loved to boast: his schooner, Betsy Jenkins, and his 4 sons. The 4 sons were all their father represented them to be, and no one ever doubted his word when he said that their like was not to be found for 50 miles around. The oldest was 32, while the youngest had just completed his 26th year, and they answered to the names of Seth, Andrew, John, and Samuel. One morning a stranger called upon Jedediah to engage him to take to Havana some iron machinery belonging to steam engines for sugar plantations. The terms were soon agreed upon, and the old man and his sons immediately set about putting the machinery on board. That accomplished, they set sail for Havana with a fair wind, and for several days proceeded on their course without any adventure of any kind. One morning, however, a vessel was descried off their starboard quarter, which, after some hesitation, the old man pronounced a pirate. There was not much time allowed them for doubting, for the vessel soon saluted them with a very agreeable whizzing of an 18-pound shot under the stern. "That means for us to heave to," remarked the old man. "Then I guess we'd better do it, hadn't we?" said Seth. "Of course." Accordingly, the Betsy Jenkins was brought up into the wind, and her main boom hauled over to windward. "Now, boys," said the old man, as soon as the schooner came to a stand, "all we can do is to be as cool as possible, and to trust to fortune. There is no way to escape that I can see now, but perhaps, if we are civil, they will take such stuff as they want, then let us go. At any rate there is no use crying about it, for it can't be helped. Now get your pistols and see that they are surely loaded, and have your knives ready, but be sure and hide them so that the pirates shall see no show of resistance." In a few moments all the arms which the schooner afforded, with the exception of 1 or 2 old muskets, were secured about the persons of our Down Easters, and they quietly awaited the coming of the schooner. "One word more, boys," said the old man, just as the pirate came round under the stern. "Now watch every movement I make, and be ready to jump the moment I speak." As Captain Spinnet ceased speaking, the pirate luffed under the fisherman's lee quarter, and in a moment more the latter's deck was graced with the presence of a dozen as savage-looking mortals as eyes ever rested upon. "Are you the captain of this vessel?" demanded the leader of the boarders, as he approached the old man. "Yes, sir." "What is your cargo?" "Machinery for engines." "Nothing else?" asked the pirate with a searching look. At this moment Captain Spinnet's eye caught what looked like a sail off to the southward and eastward, but no sign betrayed the discovery, and, while a brilliant idea shot through his mind, he hesitatingly replied, "Well, there is a leetle something else." "Ha! And what is it?" "Why, sir, perhaps I hadn't ought to tell," said Captain Spinnet, counterfeiting the most extreme perturbation. "You see, 'twas given to me as a sort of trust, and 'twouldn't be right for me to give up. You can take anything else you please, for I s'pose I can't help myself." "You are an honest codger, at any rate," said the pirate, "but, if you would live 10 minutes longer, just tell me what you've got on board, and exactly where it lays." The sight of the cocked pistol brought the old man to his senses, and, in a deprecating tone, he muttered, "Don't kill me, sir, don't. I'll tell you all. We have got 40,000 silver dollars nailed up in boxes and stowed away under some of the boxes just forward of the cabin bulkhead, but Mr. Defoe didn't suspect that anybody would have thought of looking for it there." "Perhaps so," chuckled the pirate, while his eyes sparkled with delight. And then, turning to his own vessel, he ordered all but 3 of his men to jump on board the Yankee. In a few moments the pirates had taken off the hatches, and, in their haste to get at the silver dollars, they forgot all else. But not so with Spinnet. He had his wits at work, and no sooner had the last of the villains disappeared below the hatchway, than he turned to his boys. "Now, boys, for our lives. Seth, you clap your knife across the fore, throat, and peak halyards, and you, John, cut the main. Be quick now, and the moment you've done it, jump aboard the pirate. Andrew and Sam, you cast off the pirate's grapplings, and then you jump. Then we'll walk into them 3 chaps aboard the clipper. Now for it!" No sooner were the last words out of the old man's mouth than his sons did exactly as they had been directed. The fore and main halyards were cut, and the 2 grapplings cast off at the same instant, and, as the heavy gaffs came rattling down, our 5 heroes leaped on board the pirate. The moment the clipper felt at liberty, her head swung off, and, before the astonished buccaneers could gain the decks of the fishermen, their own vessel was a cable's length to leeward, sweeping gracefully away before the wind, while the 3 men left in charge were easily secured. "Hallo there!" shouted Captain Spinnet, as the luckless pirates crowded around the lee gangway of their prize. "When you find them silver dollars, just let us know, will you?" Half a dozen pistol shots was all the answer the old man got, but they did him no harm, and, crowding up all sail, he made for the vessel he had discovered, which lay dead to leeward of him, and which he made out to be a large ship. The clipper cut through the water like a dolphin, and, in a remarkably short space of time, Spinnet luffed up under the ship's stern and explained all that had happened. The ship proved to be an East Indiaman bound for Charleston, having, all told, 30 men on board, 20 of whom at once jumped into the clipper and offered their services in helping to take the pirate. Before dark, Captain Spinnet was once more within hailing distance of his own vessel, and raising a trumpet to his mouth, he shouted, "Schooner, ahoy! Will you quietly surrender yourselves prisoners if we come on board?" "Come and try it," returned the pirate captain, as he brandished his cutlass above his head in a threatening manner, which seemed to indicate that he would fight to the last. But that was his last moment, for Seth was crouched below the bulwarks, taking deliberate aim along the barrel of a heavy rifle, and, as the bloody villain was in the act of turning to his men, the sharp crack of Seth Spinnet's weapon rang its fatal death peal, and the next moment the captain fell back into the arms of his men, with a brace of bullets in his heart. "Now!" shouted the old man, as he levelled the long pivot gun and seized a lighted match. "I'll give you just 5 minutes to make your minds up in, and, if you don't surrender, I'll blow every one of you into the other world." The death of their captain, and withal the sight of the pivot gun, its peculiar properties they knew full well, brought the pirates to their senses, and they threw down their weapons and agreed to give themselves up. In 2 days from that time, Captain Spinnet delivered his cargo safely in Havana, gave the pirate into the hands of the civil authorities, and delivered the clipper up to the government, in return for which he received a sum of money sufficient for an independence during the remainder of his life, as well as a very handsome medal from the government. End of Adventure with Pirates.
Capture of a Chinese Pirate Fleet by Anonymous. From the Royal Gazette, September 20th, 1853. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Colleen McMahon. Capture of a Chinese Pirate Fleet. The Friend of China details the destruction of a pirate fleet in the Chinese seas by HMSS Rattler, Commander Mellish. The latter received advices May 5th that the Speck, a small English steamer employed in convoying Chinese junks, had been so riddled by the pirates' shot that she was compelled to leave the vessels to their fate, the result of which was that the pirates took the whole and held them for a ransom of $10,000. Captain M, being at Amoy, immediately coaled the Rattler, and by great exertions left the next morning, and about 7 p.m. same day reached the mouth of the Min. Here the wind was so strong as to prevent communication with the shore. At 4 a.m. on the 10th, Mr. West, master, was sent to reconnoiter, and at 3:30 p.m. he returned with the Speck and intelligence that the piratical fleet were still at Nam Quan, waiting the ransom money, which they were advised had been sent to them overland. At 5:30, Rattler, with Speck in tow, proceeded. The 11th broke with a thick fog, and the ship had to lie until 8 a.m., when, the fog lifting, Single Rock was seen about 1½ miles abeam, the pirates' haven 7 miles distant. Rattler now dashed on, the fog still hanging so thick over the hills as to prevent the pirates' lookout from seeing her until she was right in among them. Then commenced the panic. Cutting cables and making sail, they stood for the entrance of the harbor, but a strong flood tide swept them inwards, and they prepared in earnest for close action. Rattler now opened the ball with a shot across the bows of one vessel making for the river, whereupon the whole fleet, 7 heavily armed junks and Lorca 19, opened a fire of round shot, grape, and pieces of chain about a foot long tied together. Their aim being too high, only a few shots struck the steamer. Giving them 2 broadsides from her starboard battery, Rattler passed up, turned, and took position stem on the tide. Then, steaming towards them, she opened fire. Upon this the pirates bore up with intent to board. Lieutenant Pidcock, afterwards killed, tending the large 8-inch gun, took steady aim and sent a shell right into the pirate chief's large junk, which, catching the magazine, caused her to blow up with all hands, the explosion also sinking a vessel near her. The Lorca then dropped astern, ceased firing, and hoisted Portuguese colors at the mizzen, and French at the main. The others made the best of their way to the shore, the pirates jumping overboard and swimming to land. There they were met by the villagers, who knocked them on the head as they reached the beach, many being speared and stoned to death in the water. Rattler now lowered her boats, and in charge of Commander Dorville, Mr. West and Messrs. Wilcox and Elliot, mates, took possession of the fleet with little or no resistance. Up to this period the casualties on our side were trifling, but accounts having been brought that some of the pirates had captured a small junk, killed the crew, and were doing their best to get up the river, Lieutenant Pidcock gave chase in the cutter. He soon came up with the miscreants in 2 junks, one of which he had boarded when the other dropped alongside, and some 50 men who were hidden in the vessel in possession rushed up and overpowered them. The last seen of Lieutenant P alive was on his knees, with his sword through a Chinese, borne down by half a dozen spears. 2 had fallen by his hand just as he fell. George Ryder, quartermaster, and Juno Phillips, A.S., both went down with him side by side, fighting desperately to the last. The rest of the cutter's crew were driven overboard, all bearing honorable testimony to the brave defense of their gallant comrades. Edward Ward, ordinary seaman, has no less than 15 spear wounds. The people on shore behaved admirably, and by their aid Rattler's wounded men got on board their ship. The encounter took place out of sight of the steamer. The pinnace, gig, and a cutter were subsequently sent to look after the pirates, the boats being in charge of Commander Dorville, Mr. Drownston, purser, and Messrs. Wilcox and Elliot. Nothing could be seen of the pirates, but the bodies of Lieutenant Pidcock and George Ryder were recovered. To return to the junks, the burning one was towed on shore and scuttled, and at low water not less than 170 pounds of molten silver were taken out of her, together with a few burnt dollars and 3 bags of specie. 5 junks and Lorca were next morning taken in tow, but at coming on to blow, one of the junks was sunk and the Lorca had to be cast off. She subsequently arrived at Amoy. 4 junks and 50 prisoners were taken into Funchal and given up to the mandarins. The number of guns captured, of all sizes, was 84, of which the pirate Commodore's junk alone mounted 16, viz. 2 32-pounders, 2 long 9 feet 13-pounders, 2 18-pounder carronades, 4 12-pounders, and others of various caliber. This is probably the most gallant and decisive achievement in the annals of any navy, and the actors deserve the thanks of every merchant trading to the China seas. End of Capture of a Chinese Pirate Fleet. Recording by Colleen McMahon.
Derelict, A Reminiscence of Treasure Island by young E. Allison. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Josh Kibbey. Derelict, A Reminiscence of Treasure Island. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Captain Billy Bones, his song. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. The mate was fixed by the boss'n's pike, the boss'n brained with a marlin spike, and Cookie's throat was marked belike. It had been gripped by fingers 10, and there they lay, all good dead men, like break-a-day in a boozing kin, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. 15 men of a whole ship's list, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Dead and be damned, and the rest gone whist, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. The skipper lay with his knob and gore, where the scullion's axe his cheek had shore, and the scullion he was stabbed times 4. And there they lay, and the soggy skies dripped all day long in upstaring eyes, at murk sunset and at foul sunrise, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. 15 men of 'em, stiff and stark, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. 10 of the crew had the murder mark, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. 'Twas a cutlass swipe, or an ounce of lead, or a yawing hole in a battered head, and the scuppers glut with a rotting red. And there they lay, aye, damn my eyes, all lookouts clapped on paradise, all souls bound just contrariwise, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. 15 men of 'em, good and true, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Every man Jack could have sailed with old Pew, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. There was chest on chest full of Spanish gold, with a ton of plate in the middle hold, and the cabin's riot of stuff untold. And they lay there that had took the plum, with sightless glare and their lips struck dumb, while we shared all by the rule of thumb, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. More was seen through the stern-light screen, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Chartings on doubt where a woman had been, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. A flimsy shift on a bunker cot with a thin dirk slot through the bosom spot, and the lace stiff dry in a purplish blot. Or was she wench, or some shuddering maid, that dared the knife and that took the blade? By God, she was stuff for a plucky jade, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. We wrapped 'em all in a mainsail tight, with twice 10 turns of a hawser's bite, and we heaved 'em over and out of sight, with a yo-heave-ho and a fare-you-well, and a sullen plunge in the sullen swell, 10 fathoms deep on the road to hell, yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. End of Derelict, A Reminiscence of Treasure Island.
Execution of the Pirates by Ezra Baldwin Strong. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Schempf. Execution of the Pirates. 10 of the pirates captured by the British sloop of war Tyne were executed at Kingston, Jamaica, on Friday, the 7th of February, 1823. About a quarter of an hour before day dawn, the wretched culprits were taken from the jail, under a guard of soldiers from the 50th Regiment and the City Guard. On their arrival at the Wherry Wharf, the military retired, and the prisoners with the town guard were put on board 2 wherries, in which they proceeded to Port Royal Point, the usual place of execution in similar cases. They were there met by a strong party of military, consisting of 50 men under command of an officer. They formed themselves into a square round the place of execution, with the sheriff and his officers with the prisoners in the centre. The gallows was of considerable length, and contrived with a drop so as to prevent the unpleasant circumstances which frequently occur. The unfortunate men had been in continual prayer from the time they were awakened out of a deep sleep till they arrived at that place, where they were to close their existence. They all expressed their gratitude for the attention they had met with from the sheriff and the inferior officers. Many pressed the hands of the turnkey to their lips, others to their hearts, and on their knees prayed that God, Jesus Christ, and the Virgin Mary would bless them and the other jailers for their goodness. They all then fervently joined in prayer. To the astonishment of all, no clerical character of any persuasion was present. They repeatedly called out, "Adonde está el Padre?" Where is the Holy Father? Juan Hernandez called on all persons present to hear him. He was innocent. What they had said about his confessing himself guilty was untrue. He had admitted himself guilty because he hoped for pardon, but that now he was to die, he called God, Jesus Christ, the Holy Ghost, the Virgin Mary, and the saints to witness that he spoke truth, that he was no pirate, no murderer. He had been forced. The lieutenant of the pirates was a wretch who did not fear God and had compelled him to act. Juan Gutierrez and Francisco de Sayas were loud in their protestations of innocence. Manuel Lima said, for himself, he did not care. He felt for the old man, Miguel Jose. How could he be a pirate who could not help himself? If it were a Christian country, they would have pardoned him for his gray hairs. He was innocent. They had both been forced. Let none of his friends and relations ever venture to sea. He hoped his death would be a warning to them, that the innocent might suffer for the guilty. The language of this young man marked him a superior to the generality of his companions in misfortune. The seamen of the Whim stated that he was very kind to them when prisoners on board the piratical vessel. Just before he was turned off, he addressed the old man. "Adios, viejo, para siempre adios." Farewell, old man, forever farewell. Several of the prisoners cried out for mercy. "Pardon, pardon." Domingo Ucaya, the black man, then addressed them. "Do not look for mercy here, but pray to God. We are all brought here to die. This is not built for nothing. Here we must end our lives. You know I am innocent, but I must die the same as you all. There is not anybody here who can do us any good, so let us only think of God Almighty. We are not children, but men. You know that all must die, and in a few years those who kill us must die too. When I was born, God set the way of my death. I do not blame anybody. I was taken by the pirates, and they made me help them. They would not let me be idle. I could not show that this was the truth, and therefore they have judged me by the people they have found me with. I am put to death unjustly, but I blame nobody. It was my misfortune. Come, let us pray. If we are innocent, so much the less we have to repent. I do not come here to accuse anyone. Death must come, one day or other. Better to the innocent than guilty." He then joined in prayer with the others. He seemed to be much reverenced by his fellow prisoners. He chose those prayers he thought most adapted to the occasion. Hundreds were witnesses to the manly firmness of this Negro. Observing a bystander listening attentively to the complaints of one of his fellow wretches, he translated what had been said into English. With a steady pace and a resolute and resigned countenance, he ascended the fatal scaffold. Observing the executioner unable to untie a knot on the collar of one of the prisoners, he with his teeth undid it. He then prayed most fervently till the drop fell. Miguel Jose protested his innocence. "No he robado, no he matado ninguno, muero inocente." "I have robbed no one. I have killed no one. I die innocent. I am an old man, but my family will feel my disgraceful death." Francisco Miguel prayed devoutly, but inaudibly. His soul seemed to have quitted the body before he was executed. Bretty Gillemilet called on all to witness his innocence. It was of no use for him to say an untruth, for he was going before the face of God. Augustus Hernandez repeatedly declared his innocence, requested that no one would say he had made a confession. He had none to make. Juan Hernandez was rather obstinate when the executioner pulled the cap over his eyes. He said, rather passionately, "Quitais de mis ojos," remove it from my eyes. He then rubbed it up against one of the posts of the gallows. Miguel Jose made the same complaint, and drew the covering from his eyes by rubbing his head against a fellow sufferer. Pedro Nondre was loud in his ejaculations for mercy. He wept bitterly. He was covered with the marks of deep wounds. The whole of the 10, including the death warrant, having been placed on the scaffold and the ropes suspended, the drop was let down. Nondre, being an immense heavy man, broke the rope and fell to the ground alive. Juan Hernandez struggled long. Lima was much convulsed. The old man, Gillemilet, and Miguel were apparently dead before the drop fell. Ucaya, the black man, gave one convulsion, and all was over. When Nondre recovered from the fall and saw his 9 lifeless companions stretched in death, he gave an agonizing shriek. He wrung his hands, screamed, "Favor, favor, me matan sin causa. Oh, buenos cristianos, me amparan, amparame, amparame. No hay cristiano en esta tierra? Mercy, mercy, they kill me without cause. Oh, good Christians, protect me, oh, protect me. Is there no Christian in this land?" He then lifted his eyes to heaven and prayed long and loud. Upon being again suspended, he was for a long period convulsed. He was an immense, powerful man, and died hard. End of the execution of the pirates.
Home of Blackbeard, one of America's cruelest pirates, by Anonymous, from the Dawson Record, August 16, 1903. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Colleen McMahon. Home of Blackbeard, one of America's cruelest pirates. Elizabeth City, North Carolina, August 6th. Within 2 miles of this town still stands the former home of the greatest pirate that ever infested the American coast, a man who, in the early part of the 18th century, made himself master of the high seas and forced the world to acknowledge his naval supremacy as no other man has ever done. This was Edward Teach, otherwise Blackbeard. This whole locality was, for more than 100 years, a rendezvous for pirates of the world, and the wife of Governor Pinckney walked the plank off Dare County, North Carolina. When Edward Teach left Bristol, England, on his first cruise, he was a mere sailor. Morgan, the famous buccaneer and privateer, had already introduced piracy as a gentleman's vocation, and until King Charles II gave him command of Jamaica as governor, he had created widespread consternation. The next king was not so friendly, and Morgan is said to have returned to his loot. Teach was by this time his boon companion and lieutenant. After the death of Morgan, Teach returned to England, where he squandered his gains. With the support of one Cornigold, an old mariner of Morgan's fleet, Teach was enabled to fit out a vessel and go into piracy for himself. With an excellent training in cruelty under Morgan, Teach began a career which is without a parallel. It was left for him to adopt Mongolian methods, murdering women and children with relentless cruelty. Teach's first action on leaving the English coast was to follow the Gulf Stream straight to Carolina, where he made for the Sounds. On the upper bank of the Pasquotank, he planted a colony accessible from the Sound. The house which the pirate built is now occupied by a well-to-do farmer. It is 2 stories high, with a deep basement walled in by rocks, which have given way to time, exposing the basement to view from the outside. All the material was originally brought from England, and though the floors and roofs have been repaired, the outside walls of English glazed brick show scarcely a crack. The doors and inner walls are carved and panelled. The attic above the second story was, according to tradition, the death chamber or execution room. Here on the floor dull splashes and spattered drops of blood are discernible. There is in the great fireplace in the attic a hidden opening, which leads to the basement. Into this opening, the bricks being first removed, the bodies of murdered captives were thrown into the moat below, which swept them out into the river and sound beyond. A secret door led from the first floor to the basement, which seems to have been the chief jail, as it has barred windows. There are marks all over the woodwork. Here Teach seems to have lived undisturbed. In the county court of Pasquotank County, North Carolina, there are recorded certain deeds granting titles to one Teach. With the inlets along the banks, which protect and create the sounds, well guarded, and with the inadequate method of naval attack in vogue in the days of Spanish supremacy, it was easy for the pirate chieftain to establish himself securely and defy the authorities. Teach obtained the title of Blackbeard soon after he became an independent pirate. He made for himself a horsehair beard, which represented a fiendish and unnatural growth of nature, as a means of spreading terror among those who fell into his hands. The beard was tied in red ribbon bows and had the desired effect. Blackbeard's end was tragic. While the pirate was in winter quarters and most of his cutthroats had scattered over the Spanish Main, Governor Spottiswoode of Virginia sent Lieutenant Maynard of the British Navy with about 30 picked men to seek Blackbeard. The latter is said to have had 17 men with him. Maynard went to the pirate's home in a small vessel. Seeing the armed craft approach, Blackbeard, with his usual daring, went out after it. After an exchange of broadsides and a battle of short duration, the English vessel suddenly presented a scene of affright. The men became frantic and rushed below deck, giving the ship up to the pirate. Blackbeard was caught in a ruse, and boldly grappled with his opponent's boat. Mounting the gunwales, the pirate crew dashed recklessly on the captured English vessel. At command, the hatchways were thrown back, and a swarm of expert swordsmen dashed to meet the buccaneers. A terrible battle followed. Blackbeard led his men with his usual intrepidity. At the last, when victory seemed within the grasp of Blackbeard, a sword entered his body and he fell wounded, so that his men lost heart and were nearly all killed. The head of Teach was severed from the body, and with this trophy mounted on the bowsprit, the English lieutenant returned to Virginia. Searchers for Blackbeard's treasure have dug all along the Carolina shores, but all in vain. Every occupant of his house has had the craze, but not a trace of his ill-gotten wealth has ever been found. End of Home of Blackbeard, one of America's Cruelest Pirates. Recording by Colleen McMahon.
The Life and Exploits of Anne Bonney by Charles Ellms. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life and Exploits of Anne Bonney. This female pirate was a native of Cork. Her father was an attorney, and by his activity in business rose to considerable respectability in that place. Anne was the fruit of an unlawful connection with his own servant-maid, with whom he afterwards eloped to America, leaving his own affectionate and lawful wife. He settled at Carolina, and for some time followed his own profession, but soon commenced merchant, and was so successful as to purchase a considerable plantation. There he lived with his servant in the character of his wife, but she dying, his daughter Anne superintended the domestic affairs of her father. During her residence with her parents, she was supposed to have a considerable fortune, and was accordingly addressed by young men of respectable situations in life. It happened with Anne, however, as with many others of her youth and sex, that her feelings and not her interest determined her choice of a husband. She married a young sailor without a shilling. The avaricious father was so enraged that, deaf to the feelings of a parent, he turned his own child out of doors. Upon this cruel usage, and the disappointment of her fortune, Anne and her husband sailed for the island of Providence in the hope of gaining employment. Acting a part very different from that of Mary Read, Anne's affections were soon estranged from her husband by Captain Rackham, and eloping with him, she went to sea in men's clothes. Proving with child, the captain put her on shore, and entrusted her to the care of some friends until her recovery, when she again accompanied him in his expeditions. Upon the king's proclamation offering a pardon to all pirates, he surrendered, and went into the privateering business, as we have related before. He, however, soon embraced an opportunity to return to his favourite employment. In all his piratical exploits Anne accompanied him, and, as we have already recorded, displayed such courage and intrepidity that she, along with Mary Read and a seaman, were the last three who remained on board when the vessel was taken. Anne was known to many of the planters in Jamaica, who remembered to have seen her in her father's house, and they were disposed to intercede in her behalf. Her unprincipled conduct in leaving her own husband and forming an illicit connection with Rackham tended, however, to render her friends less active. By a special favour, Rackham was permitted to visit her the day before he was executed, but instead of condoling with him on account of his sad fate, she only observed that she was sorry to see him there, but if he had fought like a man, he needed not have been hanged like a dog. Being with child, she remained in prison until her recovery, was reprieved from time to time, and though we cannot communicate to our readers any particulars of her future life or the manner of her death, yet it is certain that she was not executed. End of The Life and Exploits of Anne Bonney. The Life of Captain John Massey, who died for piracy, by Arthur L. Hayward. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Captain John Massey, who died for piracy. The gentleman of whom we are now to speak, though he suffered for piracy, was a man of another turn of mind than any of whom we have hitherto had occasion to mention. Captain John Massey was of a family I need not dwell on, since he hath at present two brothers living, who make a considerable figure in their respective professions. This unhappy person had a natural vivacity in his temper, which sometimes rose to such a height that his relations took it for a degree of madness. They therefore, hoping by a compliance with his humours to bring him to a better sense of things, sent him into the army, then in Flanders, under the command of the Duke of Marlborough, and there he assisted at the several sieges which were undertaken by the Confederate army after his arrival, that is, Mons, Douai, Bouchain, and several others. Yet though he was bold there, even to temerity, he never received so much as one wound through the whole course of the war, in which, after the siege of Lille, he commanded as a lieutenant, and that with great reputation. On his return into England, he at first wholly addicted himself to a religious sober life, the several accidents of the war having disposed him to a more serious temper by making him plainly perceive the hand of Providence in protecting and destroying, according as its wisdom seeth fit. But after a short stay in London, he unhappily fell into the acquaintance of a lewd woman, who so besotted him that he really intended to marry her, if the regiment's going to Ireland had not prevented it. But there the case was not much mended, since Captain Massey gave too much way to the debaucheries generally practised in that nation. On his coming back from thence, by the recommendation of the Duke of Chandois, he was made by the Royal African Company a lieutenant colonel in their service, and an engineer for erecting a fort on the coast of Africa. He promised himself great advantage and a very honourable support from this employment, but he and the soldiers under his command being very ill used by the person who commanded the ship in which he went over, being denied their proportion of provisions, and in all other respects treated with much indignity, it made a great impression on Captain Massey's mind, who could not bear to see numbers of those poor creatures perish, not only without temporal necessities, but wanting also the assistance of a divine in their last moments. For the chaplain of the ship remained behind in the Madeiras, on a foresight, perhaps, of the miseries he should have suffered in the voyage. In this miserable condition were things when the captain and his soldiers came into the river Gambia, where the designed fort was to be built. Here the water was so bad that the poor wretches, already in the most dreadful condition, were many of them deprived of life a few days after they were on shore. The captain was excessively troubled at the sight of their misfortunes, and too easily in hopes of relieving them, gave way to the persuasion of a captain of a lighter vessel than his own, who arrived in that port, and persuaded him to turn pirate rather than let his men starve. After repeated solicitations, Captain Massey and his men went on board this ship, and having there tolerable good provisions, soon picked up their strength, and took some very considerable prizes. At the plundering of these, Massey was confused and amazed, not knowing well what to do, for though he was glad to see his men have meat, yet it gave him great trouble when he reflected on the methods by which they acquired it. In this disconsolate state, his night was often so troublesome to him as his days, for, as he himself said, he seldom shut his eyes, but he dreamt that he was sailing in a ship to the gallows, with several others round him. After a considerable space, the ship putting into the island of Jamaica for necessary supply of water and provision, he made his escape to the governor, and gave him such information that he took several vessels thereby, but not being easy there, he desired leave of Sir Nicholas Laws to return home. Sir Nicholas gave him letters of recommendation, but notwithstanding those, he no sooner returned in England, but he was apprehended and committed for piracy. Soon after which he was bailed, but the persons who became security growing uneasy, he surrendered in their discharge. Soon after which he was tried, convicted, and condemned. During this space he remained in prison under condemnation, he behaved with so much gravity, piety, and composedness as surprised all who saw him, many of whom were inclined to think his case hard. No mercy was to be had, and as he did not expect it, so false hopes never troubled his repose. But as death was to cut him off from the world, so he beforehand retired all his affections from thence, and thought of nothing but that state whither he was going. In his passage to execution he pointed to the African house, said, "They have used me severely, but I pray God prosper and bless them in all their undertakings." Mr. Nicholson of St. Sepulchre's attended him in his last moments. Just before he died, he read the following speech to the people. "Good people, I beg of you to pray for my departing soul. I likewise pray God to forgive all the evidences that swore against me, as I do from my heart. I challenge all the world to say I ever did a dishonourable act or anything unlike a gentleman, but what might be common to all young fellows in this age. This was surely a rash action, but I did not designedly turn pirate. I am sorry for it, and I wish it were in my power to make amends to the Honourable African Company for what they have lost by my means. I likewise declare upon the word of a dying man that I never once thought of molesting His Grace the Duke of Chandois, although it had been maliciously reported that I always went with 2 loaded pistols to dispatch his grace. As for the Duke, I was always, while living, devoted to his service for his good offices done unto me, and I humbly beg Almighty God that he will be pleased to pour down his blessings upon his good family. Good people, once more I beg of you to pray for my departing soul. I desire my dying words to be printed, as for the truth and sincerity of it. I sign them as a man departing this world. John Massey." After he had pronounced these words, he signified it as his last request that neither his wife nor any of his relations might see his body after it was in the coffin. Then, praying a few moments to himself, he submitted to his fate, being at the time of his death 28 years old. He suffered at high water mark, Execution Dock, on the 26th of July, 1723, his unhappy death being universally pitied. End of The Life of Captain John Massey, who died for piracy. The Life of Philip Roche, a Pirate, etc. by Arthur L. Hayward. Coffee Break Collection 18. Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Philip Roche, a Pirate, etc. As in the life of Captain Massey, my readers cannot but take notice of those great evils into which men are brought by over-forwardness and inconsideration, so in the life of the malefactor we are now to speak of, they will discern what a prodigious pitch of wickedness, rapine, and cruelty human nature is capable of reaching unto, when people abandon themselves to a desire of living after their own wicked inclinations, without considering the injuries they do others while they gratify their own lusts and sensual pleasures. Philip Roche was the son of a person of the same name in Ireland. His father gave him all the education his narrow circumstances would permit, which extended, however, to reading and writing a tolerable good hand, after which he sent him to sea. Philip was a lad of ingenious parts, and instead of forgetting, as many do, all they have learnt, he, on the contrary, took all imaginable care to perfect himself in whatsoever he had but a slight notion of before he went to sea. He made abundance of coasting voyages about his native island, went once or twice to Barbados, and being a saving and industrious young fellow, picked up money enough to become first mate in a trading vessel to Nantes in France, by which, being suffered to buy goods himself, he got considerably, and was in a fair way to attaining as great a fortune as he could reasonably expect. But this slow method of getting money did by no means satisfy Roche. He was resolved to grow rich at once, and not wait till much labour and many voyages had made him so. When men once form to themselves such designs, it is not long before they find companions fit for their purpose. Roche soon met with one Neil, a fisherman of no education, barbarous but very daring, a fellow who had all the qualities that could conspire to make a dangerous villain, and who had already inured himself to the commission of whatever was black or bloody, not only without remorse but without reluctance. Neil recommended him to one Pierce Cullen, as a proper associate in those designs they were contriving. For this Cullen, as Neil informed him, was a fellow of principles and qualifications much like himself, but had somewhat a better capacity for executing them, and with Neil had been concerned in sinking a ship after insuring her both in London and Amsterdam. But Providence had disappointed them in the success of their wicked design, for Cullen having been known, or at least suspected, of doing such a thing before, those with whom they had insured at London, instead of their paying the money, caused them to be seized and brought to a trial, which demolished all their schemes for cheating insurance offices. Cullen brought in his brother to their confederacy, and after abundance of solicitation induced Wise to come in likewise. The project they had formed was to seize some light ship and turn pirates in her, conceiving it no difficult matter afterwards to obtain a stronger vessel, and one better fitted for their purpose. The ship they pitched on to execute this their villainous purpose was that of Peter Tartu, a Frenchman of a very generous disposition, who on Roche and his companions telling him a melancholy story, readily entertained them. And perceiving Roche was an experienced sailor, he entrusted him upon any occasion with the care and command of the ship. Having done so one night, himself and the chief mate, with the rest of the French who were on board, went to rest, except a man and a boy, whom Roche commanded to go up and furl the sails. He then called the rest of his Irish associates to him upon the quarter-deck. There Roche, perceiving that Francis Wise began to relent, and fearing he should persuade others in the same measures, he told him that if every Irishman on board did not assist in destroying the French, and put him and Cullen in a capacity of retrieving the losses they had had at sea, They would treat whoever hesitated in obeying them with as little mercy as they did the Frenchmen. But if they would all assist, they should all fare alike, and have a share in the booty. Upon this the action began, and two of them running up after the Frenchman and boy, one tossed the lad by the arm into the water, and the other driving the man down upon the deck, he there had his brains dashed out by Roche and his companions. They fell next upon those who were retired to their rest, some of whom, upon the shrieks of the man and boy, who were murdered, rising hastily out of their beds, and running up upon deck to see what occasioned those dismal noises, were murdered themselves before they well knew where they were. The mate and the captain were next brought up, and Roche went immediately to binding them together in order to toss them overboard, as had been consulted. 'Twas in vain for poor Tartuffe to plead the kindness he had done them all, and particularly Roche. They were deaf to all sentiments, either of gratitude or pity, and though the poor men entreated only so much time as to say their prayers and recommend themselves to God, yet the villains, though they could be under no apprehensions, having already murdered all the rest of the men, would not even yield to this. But Cullen hastened Roche in binding them back to toss them at once into the sea. Then hurrying down into the cabin, they tapped a little barrel of rum to make themselves good cheer, and laughed at the cries of the two poor drowned men, whom they distinctly heard calling upon God, until their voices and their breaths were lost in the waves. After having drunk and eaten their fill, with as much mirth and jollity as if they had been at a feast, they began to plunder the vessel, breaking open the chests and taking out of them what they thought proper. Then to drinking they went again, pleasing themselves with the barbarous expedition which they resolved to undertake as soon as they could get a ship proper to carry them into the West Indies, intending there to follow the example the buccaneers had set them, and rob and plunder all who fell into their hands. From these villainies in intention, the present state of their affairs called upon them to make some provision for their immediate safety. They turned therefore into the Channel, and putting the ship into Portsmouth, there got her new painted, and then sailed for Amsterdam, Roche being unanimously recognised their captain, and all of them promising faithfully to submit to him through the course of their future expeditions. On their arrival in Holland, they had the ship a second time new painted, and thinking themselves now safe from all discovery, began to sell off Captain Tartuffe's cargo as fast as they could. No sooner had they completed this, but getting one Mr. Annesley to freight them with goods to England, himself also going as a passenger, they resolved with themselves to make prize of him and his effects, as they had also done with the French captain. Mr. Annesley, poor man, little dreaming of their design, came on board as soon as the wind served, and the next night, a brisk gale blowing, they tore him suddenly out of his bed and tossed him over. Roche and Cullen being with others in the great cabin, he swam round and round the ship, called out to them, and told them they should freely have all his goods if they would take him in and save his life, for he had friends and fortunes enough in England to make up that loss. But his entreaties were all vain to a set of wretches who had long ago abandoned all sentiments of humour and mercy. They therefore caroused as usual, and after sharing the booty, steered the vessel for England. Some information of their villainies had by that time reached thither, so that upon a letter being stopped at the post office, which Roche, as soon as they had landed, had written to his wife, a messenger was immediately sent down, who brought Philip up in custody. Being brought to the council table and there examined, he absolutely denied either that himself was Philip Roche, or that he knew of any one of that name. But his letters under his own hand to his wife being produced, he was not able any longer to stand in that falsehood. Yet those in authority, knowing that there was not legal proof sufficient to bring these abominable men to justice, offered Roche his life, provided he gave such information that they might be able to apprehend and convict any three of his companions more wicked than himself. But he was so far from complying therewith, that he suffered those of his crew who were taken to perish in custody rather than become an evidence against them. This was the fate of Neil, who perished of want in the Marshalsea, having in vain petitioned for a trunk in which was a large quantity of money, clothes, and other things to a considerable value, which had been seized in Ireland by virtue of a warrant from the Lord Justice of that kingdom, on the account of the detention of which, while he perished for want of necessaries and clothes, Neil most heavily complained, forgetting that these very things were the plunder of those unhappy persons whom they had so barbarously murdered, after having received so much kindness and civility from them. In the meanwhile, Roche, being confined in Newgate, went constantly to the chapel, and appeared of so obliging a temper that many persuaded themselves he could not be guilty of the bloody crimes laid to his charge; and, taking advantage of these kind thoughts of theirs, he framed a new story in defence of himself. He said that there happened a quarrel on board the ship between an Irishman and a Frenchman, and that Tartu, taking part with his own nation, threatened to lash the Irishman severely, though he was not in any way in the wrong. This, he pretended, begat a general quarrel between the two nations, and the Irish being the stronger, they overpowered and threw the French overboard in the heat of their anger, without considering what they did. Throughout the whole time he lay in Newgate, he very much delighted himself with the exercise of his pen, continually writing upon one subject or other, and often assisting his fellow prisoners in writing letters, or whatever else they wanted in that kind. When he was told that Neil, who died in the Marshalsea, gushed out all parts of his body with wood, so that before he expired he was as if he had been dipped in gall, Roche replied, it was a just judgment that he who had always lived in blood should die covered with it. Some time afterwards, being told that one of his companions had poisoned himself, he said, alas, that so evil an end should follow so evil a life. For his part, he would suffer Providence to take its course with him, and rather die the most ignominious death than to his other crimes add that of self-murder. The rest who had been apprehended, dying one by one in the same dreadful condition with Neil, that is, with the blood gushing from every part of their body, which looked so much like a judgment that all who saw it were amazed, he, Roche, began to think himself perfectly safe after the death of his companions, supposing that now there was nobody to bear any testimony against him; and therefore, instead of appearing in any way dismayed, he most earnestly desired the speedy approach of an Admiralty session. It was not long before it happened, and when he found what evidence would be produced against him, he appeared much less solicitous about his trial than anybody in his condition would have been expected to be; for he very well knew it was impossible for them to prove him guilty of the murders, and as impossible for him to be acquitted of the piracy. After receiving sentence of death, he declared himself a papist, and said that he could no longer comply with the service of the Church of England, and come to chapel. He did not, however, think that he was in any danger of death, but supposed that the promises which had been made him on this first examination would now take place and prevent the execution of his sentence. When, therefore, the messenger returned from Hanover and brought the express order that he should die, he appeared exceedingly moved thereat, and without reflecting at all on the horrid and barbarous treatment with which he had used others, he could not forbear complaining of the great hardship he suffered in being put into the death warrant, after a promise had been made him of life, though nothing is more certain than that he never performed any part of those conditions upon which it was to have taken place. At the place of execution he was so faint, confused, and in such a consternation that he could not speak either to the people or to those who were nearer at hand, dying with the greatest marks of dejection and confusion that could possibly be seen in any criminal whatever. He was about 30 years old at the time of his execution, which was at high water mark, Execution Dock, on the 14th of August, 1723. End of The Life of Philip Roche, a Pirate, etc.
On Pirates by Richard Middleton. Coffee Break Collection 18. Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April 6090, California, United States of America. On Pirates. Of the nameless classics which were of so much concern to all of us when we were young, the most important were certainly those salt and blusterous volumes that told of pirates. It was in vain for kindly relatives to give us books on Nelson and his like, for their craft, beautiful though they might be to the eye, had ever the moralities lurking between decks, and if we met them it was only that we might make their crews walk the plank, and add new stores of guns and treasure to the crimson vessel, with the sinister flag which it was our pleasure to command. And yet, the books that gave us this splendid dominion, where are they now? In truth, I cannot say. Examination of recent boys' books has convinced me that the old spirit is lacking, for if pirates are there, it is only as the hapless victims of horrible British crews, with every virtue save that one which youth should cherish most, the revolutionary spirit. Who would be a midshipman when he might be a pirate? Yet all the books would have it so, and even Mr. Kenneth Graham, who knows everything that is worth knowing, does not always take the right side in such matters. The grown-up books are equally unsatisfactory to the inquiring mind. Treasure Island, which is sometimes loosely referred to, as if it were a horn-book for young pirates, hardly touches the main problems of pirate life at all. Stevenson's consideration for youth and the fond parent made him leave out all oaths. No ships are taken, no lovely females captured, nobody walks the plank, and Captain John Silver, for all the maimed strength and masterfulness that Henley suggested to the author, falls lamentably short of what a pirate should be. Captain Teach of the Sarah, in The Master of Ballantrae, is better, and there were the makings of a very good pirate captain in the master himself. But this section of the book is too short to supply our requirements. The book must be all pirates. Defoe's Captain Singleton repents and is therefore disqualified, and Marryat's Pirate is, as Stevenson said, written in sand with a salt spoon. Mr. Clark Russell, in one of his romances, ingeniously melts a pirate who has been frozen for a couple of centuries into life. But though he promises well at first, he is but a torpid ferocity, and ends, as it began, in words. Nor are the histories of the pirates more satisfying. Captain Johnson's History of Notorious Pirates I have not seen, but anyone who wishes to lose an illusion can read the trial of William Kidd and a few of his companions in the state trials of the year 1701. The captain of the Adventure galley appears to have done little to merit the name of pirate beyond killing his gunner with a bucket, and the miserable results of his pilfering bear no relationship to the enormous hoard associated with his name in the Gold Bug of Poe, though there is certainly a familiar note in finding included among his captives a number of barrels of sugar candy, which were divided in shares among the crew, the captain himself having 40 shares. The Turkish pirates mentioned in Purchas cut a very poor figure. You can read there how 4 English youths overcame a prize crew of 13 men who had been put in the ship Jacob. In a storm they slew the pirate captain, for with the handle of a pump they gave him such a pult on the pat as made his brains forsake the possession of his head. They then killed 3 of the other pirates with cuttle-axes, and brought the ship safely into Spain, where they sold the 9 Turks for galley slaves for a good sum of money, and as I think, a great deal more than they were worth. Not thus would the chronicles have described the pirates who fought and caroused with such splendid devotion in my youth. To die beneath the handle of a pump is an unworthy end for a pirate captain. The History of the Buccaneers of America, written by a brother of Fanny Burney, a book which was the subject of one of Mr. Andrew Lang's appreciative essays, is nearer the mark, for among other notable fellows mentioned therein is one Francois Lolonois, who put to death the whole crew of a Spanish ship, 90 men, by beheading them, performing himself the office of executioner. One of the gentlemen in the book turned buccaneer in order to pay his debts, while it is told of another that he shot one of his crew in church for behaving irreverently during Mass. Sir Henry Morgan and Richard Sawkins performed some pretty feats of piracy, but their main energies were concerned in the sacking of towns, and the whole book suffers from an unaccountable prejudice, which the author displays against the brave and hard-working villains of whom he writes. In truth, these real pirates are disappointing men to meet. They are usually lacking in fierceness and infidelity to the pirate ideals of courage and faithfulness to their comrades, while the fine nobility of character which was never absent from those other pirates is unknown in the historical kind. Few, if any, of them merit the old Portuguese punishment for pirates, which consisted in hanging them from the yards of their own ship, and setting the latter to drift with the winds and waves without rudder or sails, an example for rogues and a source of considerable danger to honest mariners. If that were a fitting end for great knaves, the meaner ruffians must be content with the pump handle and the bucket. It is hard if our hearts may not go out to those gloomy vessels, with their cargoes of gold and courage and rum, that sail, it seems, the mental seas of youth no more. Were they really bad for us, these sanguinary tussles, those starlit nights of dissipation? A pinafore would wipe away a deal of blood, and the rum, though we might drink it boiling like quilp, in no wise lessened our interest in homemade cake. But these regrets are of yesterday, and today I must draw what consolation I may from the kindly comment of Mr. Lang. Alluring as the pirate's profession is, we must not forget that it had a seamy side, and was by no means all rum and pieces of eight. And there is something repulsive to a generous nature in roasting men, because they will not show you where to steal hogs. End of On Pirates.
Excerpt from Captain Thomas White, from the History of the Pirates, by Henry Benton and Thomas Carey, published in 1829. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Captain Thomas White. He was born at Plymouth, where his mother kept a public house. She took great care of his education, and when he was grown up, as he had an inclination to the sea, procured him the king's letter. After he had served some years on board a man of war, he went to Barbadoes, where he married, got into the merchant service, and designed to settle in the island. He had the command of the Marigold brigantine given him, in which he made 2 successful voyages to Guinea and back to Barbadoes. In his third, he had the misfortune to be taken by a French pirate, as were several other English ships, the masters and inferior officers of which they detained, being in want of good artists. The brigantine belonging to White they kept for their own use, and sunk the vessel they before sailed in. In meeting with a ship on the Guinea coast more fit for their purpose, they went on board her and burnt the brigantine. It is not my business here to give an account of this French pirate any further than Captain White's story obliges me, though I beg leave to take notice of their barbarity to the English prisoners, for they would set them up as a butt or mark to shoot at, several of whom were thus murdered in cold blood by way of diversion. White was marked out for a sacrifice by one of these villains, for I know not what reason, had sworn his death, which he escaped thus. One of the crew, who had a friendship for White, knew this fellow's design to kill him in the night, and therefore advised him to lie between him and the ship's side, with intention to save him, which indeed he did, but was himself shot dead by the murderous villain who mistook him for White. After some time cruising along the coast, the pirates doubled the Cape of Good Hope, and shaped their course for Madagascar, where, being drunk and mad, they knocked their ship on the head, at the south end of the island, at a place called by the natives Alexa. The country thereabouts was governed by a king named Masefield. When the ship struck, Captain White, Captain Bourneman, born in the Isle of Wight, formerly a lieutenant of a man of war, but in the merchant service when he fell into the hands of the pirates. Captain Bowen and some other prisoners got into the long boat, and with broken oars and barrel staves, which they found in the bottom of the boat, paddled to Augustin Bay, which is about 14 or 15 leagues from the wreck, where they landed and were kindly received by the King of Bava, the name of that part of the island, who spoke good English. They stayed here a year and a half at the king's expense, who gave them a plentiful allowance of provision, as was his custom to all white men who met with any misfortune on his coast. His humanity not only provided for all such, but for the first European vessel that came in, he always obliged to take in the unfortunate people, let the vessel be what it would, for he had no notion of any difference between pirates and merchants. At the expiration of the above term, a pirate brigantine came in, on board which the king obliged them to enter or travel by land to some other place, which they durst not do, and of two evils chose the least, that of going on board the pirate vessel, which was commanded by one William Reed, who received them very civilly. This commander went along the coast and picked up what Europeans he could meet with. His crew, however, did not exceed 40 men. He would have been glad to take on board some of the wrecked Frenchmen, but for the barbarity they had used towards the English prisoners. However, it was impracticable, for the French, pretending to lord it over the natives, whom they began to treat inhumanly, were set upon by them, one half of their number cut off, and the other half made slaves. Reed, with his gang and a brigantine of 60 tons, steered his course for the Gulf of Persia, where they met a grab, a one-masted vessel of about 200 tons, which was made prize. They found nothing on board but bale goods, most of which they threw overboard to search for gold and to make room in the vessel. But, as they learned afterwards, they threw over, in their search, what they so greedily hunted for there was a considerable quantity of gold concealed in one of the bales they tossed into the sea. In this cruise Captain Reed fell ill and died, and was succeeded by one James. The brigantine being small, crazy, and worm-eaten, they shaped their course for the island of Mayotta, where they took out the masts of the brigantine, fitted up the grab, and made a ship of her. Here they took in a quantity of fresh provision, which is in this island very plentiful and very cheap, and found a 12-oared boat, which formerly belonged to the Ruby East Indiaman, which had been lost there. They stayed here on the monsoon time, which is about 6 months, after which they resolved for Madagascar. As they came in with the land, they spied a ship coming round from the east side of the island. They gave chase on both sides, so that they soon met. They hailed each other, and received the same answer from each vessel, namely, from the seas. They joined company. This vessel was a small French ship, laden with liquors from Martinico, first commanded by one Fourgette, to trade with the pirates for slaves at Ambanawala, on the east side of the island, in the latitude of 17 degrees 30 minutes, and was by them taken after the following manner. The pirates, who were headed by George Booth, now commander of the ship, went on board, as they had often done, to the number of 10, and carried money with them, under pretence of purchasing what they wanted. This Booth had formerly been a gunner of a pirate ship called the Dolphin. Captain Fourgette was pretty much upon his guard, and searched every man as he came over the side, and a pair of pocket pistols were found upon a Dutchman who was the first entered. The captain told him he was a rogue, and had a design upon his ship. And the pirates pretended to be so angry with this fellow's offering to come on board with arms, that they threatened to knock him on the head, and, tossing him roughly into the boat, ordered him ashore, though they had before taken an oath on the Bible, either to carry the ship or to die in the undertaking. They were all searched, but they however contrived to get on board 4 pistols, which were all the arms they had for the enterprise, though Forget had 20 hands on board, and his small arms on the awning, to be in readiness. The captain invited them into cabin to dinner, but Booth chose to dine with the petty officers, though one Johnson Isaac and another went down. Booth was to give the watchword, which was hurrah. Standing near the awning, and being a nimble fellow, at one spring threw himself upon it, drew the arms to him, fired his pistol forward among the men, one of whom he wounded, who jumping overboard was lost, and gave the signal. 3, I said, were in the cabin, and 7 upon the deck, who had handspikes, and the arms seized secured the ship's crew. The captain and his 2 mates, who were dining at dinner in the cabin, hearing the pistol, fell upon Johnson, and stabbed him in several places with their forks, but they, being silver, did him no great damage. Furigate snatched his piece, which he snapped at Isaac's breast several times, but it would not go off. At last, finding his resistance vain, he submitted, and the pirate set him and those of his men who would not join them on shore, allowing them to take his books, papers, and whatever else he claimed as being to himself, and besides, treating him very humanely, gave him several casks of liquor, with arms and powder, to purchase provisions in that country. I hope this digression, as it was in a manner needful, will be excused. End of Captain Thomas White. Syllabus for the United States v. Smith, decided by the Supreme Court in 1820. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The United States v. Smith. The Act of the 3rd of March, 1819, C. 76, S. 5, referring to the law of nations for a definition of the crime of piracy, is a constitutional exercise of the power of Congress to define and punish that crime. The crime of piracy is defined by the law of nations with reasonable certainty. Robbery or forcible depredation upon the sea, animo furandi, is piracy by the law of nations and by the act of Congress. This is an indictment for piracy against the prisoner Thomas Smith, before the Circuit Court of Virginia on the act of Congress by the 3rd of March, 1819, C. 76. Footnote E, which provides, Section 5, that if any person or persons whatsoever shall on the high seas commit the crime of piracy, as defined by the law of nations, and such offender or offenders shall afterwards be brought into or found in the United States, every such offender or offenders shall, upon conviction thereof, before the Circuit Court of the United States for the district into which he or they may be brought, or in which he or they shall be found, be punished with death. And footnote A. The jury found a special verdict as follows. We of the jury find that the prisoner Thomas Smith, in the month of March, 1819, and others, were part of the crew of a private armed vessel, called the Criollo, commissioned by the government of Buenos Aires, a colony then at war with Spain, and lying in the port of Margarita. That in the month of March, 1819, the said prisoner and others of the crew mutinied, confined their officer, left the vessel, and in the said port of Margarita seized by violence a vessel called the Irresistible, a private armed vessel lying in the port, commissioned by the government of Articas, who also was at war with Spain. That the said prisoner and others, having so possessed themselves of the said vessel, The Irresistible, appointed their officers, proceeded to sea on a cruise, without any documents or commission whatever, and while on that cruise, in the month of April 1819, on the high seas, committed the offence charged in the indictment, by the plunder and robbery of the Spanish vessel therein mentioned. If a plunder and robbery aforesaid be piracy under the Act of the Congress of the United States entitled, an act to protect the commerce of the United States and punish the crime of piracy, then we find the said prisoner guilty. If the plunder and robbery above stated be not piracy under the said Act of Congress, then we find him not guilty. The Circuit Court divided on the question whether this be piracy as defined by the law of nations, so as to be punishable under the Act of Congress of the 3rd of March, 1819, and thereupon the question was certified to this court for its decision. End of Syllabus for the United States v. Smith by the Supreme Court of the United States, 1820.
The Yankee Privateer by Arthur Hale. Coffee Break Collection 18, Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Chris Pyle. The Yankee Privateer. Come listen and I'll tell you how first I went to sea, to fight against the British and earn our liberty. We shipped with Captain Wimple, who never knew a fear, the captain of the Providence, the Yankee Privateer. We sailed and made good cheer, there were many pretty men on the Yankee Privateer. The British Lord High Admiral, he wished old Whipple harm. He wrote that he would hang him at the end of his yard arm. My lord, wrote Captain Whipple back, it seems to me it's clear that if you want to hang him, you must catch your privateer. We sailed and made good cheer, but not a British frigate could come near the privateer. We sailed to the southward, and nothing did we meet, till we found 3 British frigates and their West Indian fleet. Old Whipple shut our ports as we crawled up near, and they sent us all below on the Yankee Privateer. So slowly he sailed, we dropped to the rear, and not a soul suspected the Yankee Privateer. At night we put the lights out, and forward we ran, and silently we boarded the biggest merchantman. We knocked down the watch, and the lubbers shook for fear. She's a prize without a shot to the Yankee Privateer. We sent the prize north while we lay near, and all day we slept on the bold privateer. For 10 nights we followed, and ere the moon rose, each night a prize we'd taken beneath the lion's nose. When the British looked to see why their ship should disappear, they found they had in convoy a Yankee privateer. But we sailed and made good cheer. Not a coward was on board of the Yankee privateer. The biggest British frigate bore round to give us chase, but though he was the fleeter, old Whipple wouldn't race, till he'd raked her fore and aft, for the lubbers couldn't steer. Then he showed them the heels of the Yankee privateer. Then we sailed and we made good cheer, but not a British frigate could come near the privateer. Then northward we sailed to the town we all know, and there lay our prizes all anchored in a row. And welcome were we to our friends so dear, and we shared $1 million on the bold privateer. We'd sailed and we made good cheer. We had all full pockets on the bold privateer. Then we each manned a ship, and our sails we unfurled, and we bore the stars and stripes o'er the oceans of the world. From the proud flag of Britain we swept the seas clear, and we earned our independence on the Yankee privateer. Then landsmen and sailors one more cheer. Here is 3 times 3 for the Yankee privateer. End of The Yankee Privateer. Recording by Chris Pyle.